So in this video, I'm going to be talking about what metacognition means and some ideas for how we can try and make our own children think more independently and become more effective learners. I wonder how sure you would be in saying yes to the questions on the screen now. But I know we would be more confident saying yes if we'd definitely trained our students with metacognitive strategies throughout all their learning in school. So metacognition is about thinking skills to enable pupils to learn independently, regulate their own learning so they're not overwhelmed when problem solving. And if we more explicitly train students to think about their thinking more carefully, then we'll close the gap between pupils who may have already developed those skills, perhaps naturally, and those who haven't. Metacognition rates as one of the most effective teaching and learning strategies to embed by the EEF with high levels of impact. So what do I mean by metacognition? Well, I believe there's two forms really. Self-regulation, which is to plan, monitor and evaluate in every situation. But I know that other teachers and researchers have considered metacognition in a different three-part system: knowledge of the task, knowledge of strategies, and knowledge of self. The two versions can work together, of course, though, because during the planning stage, for example, you'll need to consider what you know about the task, what strategies you'll use for it, etc. So I've personally become more used to the planning, monitoring, evaluating process, and I find that easy to incorporate in my modelling and tasks and feedback. Hopefully, if we encourage metacognition in their learning, students will become more motivated, able to regulate their emotions throughout the learning process, and improve their self-discipline. So let's see how we can take a very simple everyday problem or task and explore the metacognitive thinking behind it. So how did you get to school today? The planning stage to get to school would be considering what time you need to arrive, perhaps know where you're starting and finishing on a map roughly, or checking a sat-nav app to see which route looks best, choosing the right transport and deciding which of the strategies you're capable of using. The monitoring would be during the journey. Am I going to get there on time? How many times did you check the time on your way in? If the traffic was busy, did you persevere or did you change tactic? Were you sure that you were nearing the end goal throughout the journey? And then lastly, once you completed the task, were you happy with it? Were you on time or were you late or did you not get there? Would you do it the same again tomorrow, or how would you improve on it and why? I think that we certainly expect our students to already structure tasks for themselves like this, either because we assume they already can, or we give them some brief prompting to do it. But I think this really reminds me that the more explicit we are, and the more that they hear us using this process and modelling it for them, it will perhaps become habit for their brains, and the better students will become at learning in general. I listened to an example of metacognition in the classroom on the Evidence-Based Education podcast, where an art teacher had been observed using metacognition in their lesson, where students were learning how to create a self-portrait. And even just within the introduction in their lesson, the teacher had gone through the whole planning, monitoring and evaluating process. So at first, the art teacher talked about the task and asked some simple questions around what they were going to need to do. Then he modelled a quick version while talking through it, asking himself rhetorical questions as he went, like, is this proportion right? Should I do deeper shading here? So the pupils could hear his thinking out loud. Then the pupils evaluated his mock-up with him afterwards, which is what then he wanted them to do with their own work. So I think verbalizing that metacognitive process is training them to think similarly when they do their work. And I feel like if he didn't use that modelling, students would have still been able to do a self-portrait, but for some pupils, they wouldn't have been as good. Whenever I think of metacognition, I can't help but think about exam classes and their revision that they're doing for their exams. Even at university, many students will still read and highlight notes as their revision. And I think that rather than waiting for metacognitive skills to develop in pupils simply by maturity, we should train our young people to do it effectively by modelling it for them and showing them how to do it. I don't think this is something like metacognition is something that we can teach on its own, but rather we can try and embed it within some subject content and emphasize that process and inform them of the importance of it, perhaps. So when we do have opportunities like study skill sessions or something like that, I think it's important to let them know how important it is and what an impact it can have. When each of us were doing our teacher training, I'm sure we were all encouraged to plan, monitor and evaluate our teaching again and again and again. Learning is our profession, and so we enjoy it and we always use those processes ourselves. So I really believe that we're the best models to then show that to our students, not necessarily for them to go and become teachers, but for whatever they want to learn after school. So some common classroom strategies that can help structure metacognition include ensuring that you have some key questions to ask, either genuinely to your pupils and wanting answers from them, or rhetorically to yourself during modelling or during feedback. Creating success criteria with the class before they do an independent task. Following the I do, we do, you do model so that pupils know that they will soon need to follow that same process as you're thinking that you have modelled in the previous examples. During a task, freezing the class and offering verbal feedback on the monitoring phase. Are you nearing the end goal? Do you need to change tactic? And perhaps use that pause as an opportunity to praise any good thinking skills that you've seen or heard in that previous part of the lesson. Lastly, group work. If pupils are asking each other these questions, again, it can help embed the dialogue of planning, monitoring, and evaluating. I've created some key questions that you may want to consider using in lessons on this slide, or a different version here, which are some sentence starters instead. And lastly, I'll leave you with this. I wonder how effective you were at learning anything from this video. Did you plan in advance? Did you consider what you already knew about metacognition before you press play? Were you ready to make a note of anything while it played, perhaps? And then during the video, did you find yourself becoming more familiar with what metacognition is about? And now that the video is finished, have you learnt or considered anything new? What could you put into practice? Or what would have made this video better for you? So feel free to leave me a comment. Thanks for listening.